In this lesson in style, we'll be talking about awkward sentences, learning what they are and how to fix them. Now, an awkward sentence is not, like the other issues of style that we've been talking about, it's not about grammatical incorrectness. An awkward sounding sentence can be grammatically correct, but there's just something off about it. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't look right on the page, even if you might not be able to pinpoint exactly why, but it's just off. And so we'll be talking about how to identify awkward sentences and how to fix them. So the first thing is that you have to develop an ear for what sounds right and then be willing to reword a sentence until it sounds smooth, clear, and direct. Because good writing is like music. It has a certain sound to it. It doesn't sound rough. It doesn't sound awkward. You don't trip over your own words and ideas. It comes across as crisp and clean. And so one way of fixing awkward sentences is just to rework them. Not necessarily attack it grammatically, but just kind of pull it apart and put it back together in a different shape and see if that works better. Let's take this example. Taking life a day at a time is how I think it should be done to be happy. So it's not a terrible sentence, but it's unnecessarily convoluted and indirect for the simple idea that it's trying to convey. So you can just step back and say, how could I better write that? How could I better construct this? And one possibility is just to say, taking life one day at a time will make you happy. So this does a couple things. First of all, we eliminated two to-be verbs in here, and there's fewer words altogether, and it's stated more directly. There is a more methodical approach if you want to take it from a grammatical point of view. You can ask yourself a couple questions. The first question is, what is the sentence about? Or what is the core subject of the sentence? So choose a noun to express that topic. Maybe it's that word is already in the awkward sentence you're trying to revise, or maybe it's something else, a new word that will better convey that idea. But just choose a noun. That is going to be your subject. And then ask, what is this subject doing? And that's when you choose your verb. So right away, you're starting off with a better sentence construction. In this awkward sentence, let's see if we can work with it. The fact that we don't eat a balanced diet is our biggest health problem, and that we don't get enough exercise is also a big issue. We can understand what that sentence is saying, but it's certainly not as direct and clear and straightforward as it could be. So let's try this method. First we'll ask, what is this sentence about? What is the core subject or subjects of the sentence? Because remember, we can have compound subjects. We can have two subjects, two or more. So if we look at this, we can see that it's really about diet and exercise. We could choose health problems, and that would be fine. We could take that approach, but we'll just choose diet and exercise and see what that does for us here. Now it talks about not eating a balanced diet and not getting enough exercise, so we can state that more directly and say poor diet and lack of exercise. So that's those are the subjects of our sentence. Okay, what do poor diet and lack of exercise do in this sentence? They cause health problems. So we can say poor diet and lack of exercise cause our greatest health risks. This new sentence is shorter, first of all, and it's more clear and direct than the awkward construction. It's easier to read and it's easier to understand. Another thing to avoid in creating awkward writing is to avoid word or phrase repetition. In this example, we have a short paragraph that says, America was the first country to successfully implement a democracy guaranteed by a constitution. The process was not easy and involved a lot of debate among the founding fathers, but eventually they were able to successfully implement democratic elections. The successful implementation of the Bill of Rights eventually brought reluctant colonies into the new democracy. We can see here that the writer latched onto a couple of nice words and phrases and just repeated those throughout. If you come onto a nice word or phrase, there's no need to keep repeating it. Just let it do its job and stand alone and move on, and choose other words occasionally to mix it up a little bit. So in the improved version here, I won't read through it, but you can see that those words and phrases have been greatly reduced in this version. Okay, let's talk about avoiding cliches in writing. I put cliches in this lesson not necessarily because they are exactly awkward, but like awkward phrasing, they become tedious and uninteresting to read. So cliches are overused phrases that have become predictable and dull. Some examples here of some cliches is things like, cliches are a dime a dozen. Her words cut like a knife. Beauty is skin deep. I couldn't believe my eyes. So these are things that you have heard in speech, you've heard in conversation, that you have read before, and we all know them. The problem with using them in writing is that we want writing to be fresh and original, and using cliches just makes it a little more predictable and less interesting. Another way to avoid awkwardness is to avoid excessive intensifiers and qualifiers. So intensifiers are words that attempt to add force or weight to a sentence, or in other words, intensify it. And there's nothing wrong with these words, but if used too often, it can actually weaken and water down the writing. Again, just trust the words that you're using to do the work that they need to do. So let's look at some examples. It is really amazing how intensifiers make sentences very cumbersome. There's a sense here that the writer was not trusting that the reader would get that it was amazing, or that the reader would not understand that it's cumbersome, so it had to throw out really amazing and very cumbersome. Just trust that the words will do the work that they need to do, and you don't need to layer the writing with, sprinkle it with intensifiers. Another example. I am so glad I know how to avoid making this extreme mistake so often. Okay, avoiding excessive qualifiers. Gun laws are probably a good idea most of the time. So you can see in this example, qualifiers tend to weaken and pull back from a statement. They do just what it says. They qualify an argument and leave plenty of wiggle room to avoid stating something directly and clearly. For the most part, it has been a somewhat good year. So again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with qualifiers, as there's nothing necessarily wrong with intensifiers, but and even in these example sentences, they're not terrible. But imagine an entire essay filled with these intensifiers or qualifiers. You can see how that it would become awkward and tedious and just water down the writing. We want writing to be powerful, direct, and clear. So there we go for awkward sentence construction. It's something that you need to train your ear to hear, and then experiment with different ways to fix sentences that you read that don't sound quite right. Remember that sentences are like clay. You can shape them and reshape them as many times as needed until you arrive at the form that you are looking for. In fact, as I look back in my own experience of writing and also editing the papers of others, I would say that the biggest problems are not grammatical mistakes per se, that they really have to do with awkward and wordy sentence construction. I think that this lesson on awkward sentences and the lesson on wordy sentences are probably two of the most important in this entire course. So go ahead and be sure to do the exercises. This is a subjective kind of exercise, so there is no exact right or wrong answer in how to fix an awkward sentence, but just give it a try and see what you can come up with.